Hello, everyone. Welcome into another episode of Bolt Breakdowns here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel. My name is Alex, as always, and we are here to talk about Week 1 Chargers free agency, which may be in the books, may not be in the books as we record this show. I have Twitter open just in case anything does break, but we are here with Chargers Unleashed, Jake Hefner, to react to everything that happened. Jake, how are you doing in Week 1 of free agency?
First of all, Mr. Ensdorf, it's been way too long since the pessimistic twins have come back together for a show, and it feels great. Obviously, always fun talking with you, especially this time of the year when things have been interesting, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
In some circles, they would consider it chaotic, asking the question, what is going on right now? But for the most part, when you look at it, let's hope they land on their feet. Let's just say that much, right?
Right. Yeah, I think when you I sort of think about it like this. When you look at each of the individual moves they've made, I think they all make sense, right? Even dating back to the Najee Harris signing and then how that contract played out, $5 million guaranteed, forward incentives. It's like, okay, I get why that's a better fit than JK Dobbins was, but he's still running behind that offensive line right now, right? And, they're sort of, at the moment, before we get any offensive line type movement or a signing there, he's scheduled to run behind the three same guys, of the end of the season and, the playoff game. Salyer started the playoff game over Pipkins, but, we kind of expected Trey Pipkins to be cut, and then he wasn't, and he's still here. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic of what's been going on here. So what's been your overall reaction to, I guess, the start of free agency versus now, as far as aggressiveness level and where the Chargers have landed on some of these things?
Yeah, I think if you were to take that first 24 hours, I really don't think that anybody should be surprised in terms of the pace that the Chargers were making free agent moves. We knew that they were not going to be big players in some of the big free agent signings. Joe Ortiz had said as much during Combine Week that he wanted to be responsible, not necessarily not spending. That doesn't mean not spending, but being responsible with some of his signings, as he had alluded to the last time that the Chargers had this much cap space a few years back under Tom Telesco, and those spendings in big name free agents didn't yield the return on investment that you were hoping for. So right before free agency kicks off, you obviously bring back Khalil Mack. That was a must move to do after Joey Bosa ended up departing. And then you look at some of the moves that they brought in since then. So like you, the Najee Harris one, to me, I personally had a preference to bring JK back. I thought a year in that contract. I thought for what Greg Roman wanted to do in that offense, that he has more explosive. He was more explosive than Najee, and I thought that combination, if you were to bring him back and pair him with another running back in this draft class, that would be a lethal 1-2 punch that you could create moving forward. Now, Najee obviously has put together a nice string statistically for himself over the last few years in terms of what he's been able to produce. His durability has obviously been there. His production's been there. But as you said, if we're putting that same trio of interior offensive line back out there, it's really not going to make a difference who the name is on the back as it stands right now. And then you look at some of the other moves that they made, bringing back Denzel Perryman, bringing back Tyler Tart, which you needed to do after you lost out on Poona Ford. One of the things that Joe Ortiz definitely has made an emphasis on, that he's always talked about, is bringing back a lot of their in-house free agents. And they had a number of them this year that they had to make decisions on. And I think Denzel and Tyler Tart, after you lost Poona, was definitely must moves that you needed to do to shore up some of those position groups. Troy Dye behind that after you lost Nick Neiman on special teams. That was critical to do. And that was kind of like the first of the big dominoes to drop. And then it progressed, obviously, from there with some outside moves that I'm sure that we'll talk about here shortly.
Yeah, I think letting Poona walk is one of the more interesting ones, just because, we just saw them sign Deshaun Hand as well as Naquan Jones yesterday to kind of pair with Tyler Tart. But you go on, our lads, and you read the depth chart of the DT room without Poona Ford, and it's like, okay, you have Tyler Tart, Scott Matlock, splitting his DT fullback role. The two that they signed yesterday in Hand as well as Jones, but then it's like Justin Boydby, tried to contribute in there. and Otito Ogbonya. So like, it's not necessarily the worst room in the league, but like that does feel like a hole where it's like, okay, it is a deep DT class, but you're kind of pigeonholed after losing Puna into probably using a top at least 100 pick, I think, on a defensive tackle now. And in addition to DT, this week of free agency has gotten me into that line of thinking with a number of positions, including tight end. Like, what are we doing there? Offensive guard. Like, if the draft is today, which it's not, thankfully, they're probably taking a guard round 1.
Yeah.
Like, that is probably what they're doing, which you don't necessarily want to say. You don't want to necessarily say would be a bad move in its entirety. There are some guys there. I like Gray Zabel's tape enough, but like, I don't think that is how we felt like necessarily the first week of free agency would play out, where it's like there's no guards and you're probably forced into taking one of those first 2 rounds. And then you just keep going through the positions after that. It's like, you could talk about wide receiver. You could talk about edge now that, Joey's gone, right? So on and so forth, defensive tackle. And it's like, okay, well, you have 3 picks in the top 100, or, you don't have that many picks, right, to kind of fill these positions. And obviously, as Joe Ortiz did last year, there's the first wave of free agency, then the second wave of free agency, in which they signed a lot of guys like Christian Fulton and Puna Ford last year and got really good production out of them. So on one level, I trust the coaching staff to kind of be able to do the same thing again, right? And get some of those second wave free agents, get some of that production out of them. Hopefully don't do that and let them walk to the Rams next year. But either way, it just feels like there's a lot banking on this second wave of free agency, to make sure things are shored up before the draft. And I didn't think, I guess, going into the draft initially that there would just, after the first week of free agency, that there would be this much work to do, I guess, to clean up the rosters.
No, and that's fair. That's fair. Literally, what is it? Every signing, with the exception of Dante Jackson, has been for a 1-year deal. Right. So here's Joe Ortiz believing in his comp pick formula again, banking on guys that can become reclamation projects, as we obviously saw with, guys like Christian Fulton, JK Dobbins, Puna Ford, all signed on 1-year deals, all had tremendous back bounce 2024 campaigns. But you're kind of in a similar situation again, and you are banking on a lot of these free agents to come out and hit for you. And like you mentioned, with the Puna signing hurt, that's one I don't think that you can get around any fact that when you see the numbers and when you see the production that he put up last year, there was no question that he was your best interior defensive lineman that you had on that line. And when you see the numbers come through, you're like, that's just one that you would have wanted them to be able to do and get done. So you try to supplant one player by signing 2 in Deshaun Hand and Naquan Jones. Bringing Tahir Tart back, as I mentioned, was already critical at that point for what you needed to do. So strangely enough, I think you're in a better position from a depth perspective, I think, than what you were last year before the draft, because you brought Puna in, you brought Tahir Tart in, both on 1-year deals prior to the draft last year, and then you drafted Justin Ebogbe. But at that point in time, we were still banking on them to do something. Right. And what was the draft going to look like? It's in a similar position now. It really is, because now it's how many snaps is Justin Ebogbe going to see this season? Tito essentially is, you could say, is on the bubble for next year in terms of how these moves ultimately end up panning out. And what Scott Matlock really going to do? Is Morgan Fox going to end up returning? We don't know, but you still have to add something to that interior defensive line group. So yeah, 22 out of the question, or 22 for a defensive lineman is definitely not out of the question, even with them bringing back Tahir Tart and signing 2 guys on free agents on the free agent market. So it's still there. And it'll be interesting to see how everything breaks come April 24th. But again, this defensive line class is, thankfully for the Chargers, it's very, very deep, and they can find some talent in multiple rounds for that. You move forward with the secondary a little bit, and I was interested in talking to you about this because we know the guys that they brought in, in terms of Dante Jackson, Benjamin St-Juste. This is another situation, much like Christian Fulton, where you're banking on a reclamation project to hit for you. In terms of their fit for Jesse Minter's defense, in terms of what they're able to do from a zone coverage perspective, that's great. There are holes to their game. This is where the other half of this comes into play, that when you have coaching like Jesse Minter and secondary coach Steve Clinkscale, who did a phenomenal job with the secondary unit last year, this is something that the Chargers haven't been able to hang their hat on in terms of, their own investment to say, I trust this coach enough to come in and develop XYZ player to make them better. And I think that's what a lot of what you're going to witness here with these two signings. And the Chargers aren't done adding in the secondary, I guarantee you. And it'll most likely pivot to the draft, because Joe Ortiz has always said that you can never have enough good corners. But when you look at what Steve Clinkscale did last year with Christian Fulton, Cam Hart, Tarheeb Still, Elijah Molden, he was working overtime to make that secondary unit work with a number of injuries that were coming in and out of there. And he makes sure that a number of those guys are capable of playing multiple positions. So it'll be a big task for Steve Clinkscale to come in and try to rework this with two new bodies and two young players going into their second season. But they are not done adding to that position whatsoever.
Yeah, Dante Jackson is kind of an interesting one. Obviously, we saw what Fulton got in free agency. He got $10 million per year with Kansas City. So I think that was probably just a little bit over what the Chargers were willing to pay, considering what they got Dante Jackson for. Was that 2 years, 12, I think, something like that. I don't totally remember off the top of my head. But, you get him, you get St-Juste. St-Juste, I think, being kind of your 6'3", like I just felt like they kind of wanted to add a body there.
Big body.
Yeah. So you get that there. At least at least Mike Williams has a highlight on him from last year. So you get both of the guys from that clip, as Twitter indicated. But I think they both certainly fit kind of what they're looking for profile wise. But yeah, sort of as you said, especially with St-Juste, to some extent with Jackson, both reclamation projects, but I think it makes it more palatable scheme fit wise in terms of how you're going to put all this together with Cam Hart and Tarheeb, who we expect to start. Hart, outside corner. I think they would like to put Still in slot, probably a little bit, maybe some outside. Derwin will obviously play a lot of the slot as well. And then you kind of have Dante Jackson, who will play a lot of outside corner for you. So I think this gives them a little bit more optionality before you go into the draft. And, you probably aren't taking a corner maybe in those first, 3-ish rounds now. So you sort of shore up that group, so to speak, and focus on some of the other bigger holes of the roster. But I thought, as far as the moves themselves, the tackling aspect concerns me a little bit, but we also saw this with Christian Fulton, who I was highly skeptical of last year. He had an over 20% missed tackle rate with the Titans, and he comes here and, he was a really good tackler for all the, lapses and coverages down the stretch. I think he had single digit 9% missed tackle rate, was really good, in particular the run game, blowing up screens. So, if Jesse Minter can kind of work his magic again and then get really competitive tacklers and performances out of those guys in that department, then I think a lot of the concerns about those signings are probably a little overstated from a coverage standpoint. But yeah, so we'll kind of see what happens there, and also what they do decide to add in the draft, like you alluded to. The Mike Williams signing. So we came in with the big expectations on Friday or Saturday. Here comes Devontae and here comes DK Metcalf. And it's Mike Williams, which, is fine. Mike is, 1-year deal up to $6 million. They perused him, at the trade deadline last year as to, could they get him back? And so, I think it makes sense to get that big prototypical X receiver for the amount that they did. Sort of shores up the outside of your room. What did you think of bringing Mike Williams back, as far as is it enough for this wide receiver room? And I guess what else they need to add over the next couple months here.
In short, is it better? Yes. Is it enough? No. When you go back to last year and what you were expecting out of that wide receiver group, we were expecting GJ Chark to be the X receiver of this team. And unfortunately, whether due to injury or just him being on the active roster, which didn't really end up happening until the final 2 weeks of the season, you just didn't really get a chance to see that X receiver. And Quentin Johnston was forced into certain positions that he still wasn't ready for yet. You bring back Mike Williams, who not only has a number of years of familiarity with Justin Herbert now, but it's now going to allow Quentin Johnston to be in a position that's going to be best for him. Get him in those intermediate crossing routes. Get him into open space where he can create those yak opportunities. And obviously, Ladd's going to man the slot position in this circumstance. But I say again, it's on a one-year deal. So there's no way that you can tell me that you're not playing the long game with this, because after losing Josh Palmer and the rest of the wide receiver core that you had, Jalen Reagor, outside of that Arizona game, really didn't see another pass sailed his direction throughout the rest of the season. So,
he got the one against the Saints.
Yes, that's right. That's right. I forgot about that. You are correct.
Out of all the passes he can catch, he got that one somehow.
That's right. But given that circumstance, you can't bank on Mike Williams being the end-all, be-all as it relates to adding more weapons for Justin Herbert. So it may take away the wide receiver talk at 22, which I honestly believe if it was anybody but Teterow and McMillan that would fall to that point, I don't think that they would be entertaining any other wide receivers at that spot. But I do definitely think that you're going to look for another X option to add, maybe late round 3 or early on day 3 of the draft.
Yeah, I definitely think you need to go through the draft and get one at some point. We'll see what they do in the rest of free agency. I think some of this can also be alleviated by what they decide to do at tight end, which now gets really interesting because they had Evan Ingram for a visit. Evan Ingram said, nope, I'm going to go play for Sean Payton, which, picking Sean Payton over Greg Roman, I get it to an extent in terms of getting your stats and getting your numbers. But now the Chargers are left with what else is out there on the tight end market, and there's not necessarily a quick fix available in free agency. I did want to mention it on the show because Jordan Schultz actually just posted this as we were recording. But the Eagles have been open to talks involving tight end Dallas Goedert and defensive end Bryce Huff. But through the context of, we've heard some stuff about the Ravens and Mark Andrews, which obviously Joe Ortiz being here, a lot of familiarity there. Dallas Goedert potentially available for trade. I do think this becomes kind of a moment where you have to look at one of those two options, and certainly at least investigate it, and make it so, hey, in the likely event that Warren and Loveland are not there at 22, which I think kind of as we go by the day seems likelier at this point than not, that both of them will be gone. You're not pigeonholing yourselves kind of in the other rounds, really hoping that someone else falls to you round 2. And maybe that you can kind of ultimately wait on tight end if you do acquire one of those guys. So what do you kind of think about the potential trade market for the Chargers as far as the tight ends here?
Yeah, I mean, you said it. I don't see how you could look at this chart right now and say you've got Will Dissly on your roster, you've got Tucker Fisk on your roster, and you lost out on Stone Smart when he went and signed with the Jets. You need a move tight end. And when you have options like Dallas Goedert on the market and Mark Andrews possibly on the market, I think you definitely need to entertain that. And if this is true, if these reports are accurate, that there have been open trade talks or contacts between the Chargers organization and either the Baltimore Ravens or the Philadelphia Eagles, then this should be something that they should definitely try to take advantage of and get Justin Herbert a weapon at the tight end spot that he has not had since Hunter Henry. I look at the Evan Ingram signing. I've tried to put it in a positive spin because, yeah, you'd love to have seen Evan Ingram on this roster, but at the same time, talking about Colston Loveland, that takes one domino, one team out of the running for Colston Loveland that is before the Chargers. On top of that, if the Saints lost out on Juwan Johnson, not able to re-sign him, that would have been another one that you would probably be saying, that's just another possibility for
Right.
the Chargers to miss out on a tight end. So I still definitely think that the possibility of at least Colston Loveland, not Tyler Warren, but Colston Loveland being there at 22 is good as it stands today. But we know how this is as it relates between now and April 24th. There's still plenty of time, and nobody can really have a good, accurate depiction in terms of where guys are going to accurately be. Tyler Warren could definitely go higher than where he's been projected to go for the last 6 weeks for the Indianapolis Colts, and that could obviously compound everything. And Loveland could definitely very well be off the board before the Chargers select a 22. So given that possibility, and given what you currently have on your roster, you need to find a way to make one of these moves, honestly, because, as you said, what else is there? What else is there?
So, what else is there? I decided to go on the PFF.
Of course you did. You're so good at going down the rabbit hole.
The PFF free agent rankings. There's 82nd ranked overall free agent is Tyler Conklin. The next best available tight end at 250 is former Charger Gerald Everett. So both of those two guys are available, which I say that to say, yeah, it's time to probably pull a trade when you're kind of looking at the field, and those are probably your two best options. I certainly think there are fallback options. Closer to the draft, if the Chargers don't get what you want, then yeah, you can probably sign somebody like Everett or somebody like a Conklin. But to me, I do think it is getting to the point where if they're willing to do a fifth or a fourth for Goddard or for Mark Andrews, I think you do really have to consider it, as well as just both of those guys fitting well. And the part of that is it just allows you to play Disley better in terms of what you signed to Disley do originally, right? You assigned him to sort of be your kick-ass C-gap blocker tight end too. You didn't sign him to be your pass-catching TE1, right? And so when people go back to the Texans game, right, he's not necessarily the most natural receiver, prone to some drops, right? But if you kind of let other guys and let other tight ends take care of that at the top of your roster, that sort of opens up, Disley doing sort of what he was signed here to do when they originally brought him in with Hayden Hurst back in the day. So some internal extensions. Obviously, Elijah Molden's been re-signed for a while. Then they dropped the bomb on Chargers Twitter, so to speak, with Bradley Bozeman returning, JK Scott and Te'Ar Tart, Jalen Reagor, Troy Dye, and of course Khalil Mack and Denzel Perriman are their other re-signings. Any particular storylines that sort of stick out to you there?
I think the Elijah Molden one was, I don't think that's any surprise to anyone in terms of arguably he was the top free agent next to Mack that you said to yourself, that one had to get done given the play. And Jesse Minter had talked about his importance when he went down in the second to the last week of the season, how important of a loss that was. And you had talked about it earlier, having Elijah Molden back there with Alohi Gilman, with Derwin James, and whoever the fourth safety is going to be in that rotation, it still allows Derwin to play his best ball closer to the line of scrimmage in the nickel spot, wherever you want to rotate him. So that was huge as it relates to the Chargers and internal free agent signings. Khalil Mack coming after that, we had already talked about it in terms of the need to do that move after Bosa had the Chargers had decided to release him. That's another one where position-wise for edge has now elevated a little bit, because you have Khalil Mack on a one-year deal. This is now Tooley going into year 3. Bud Dupree still on a one-year deal. What are you going to do with Tremont Morris-Brash? Is he going to get another opportunity? But you need to start kind of planning for the future as far as who's going to be the next long-term option across from Tooley. So expect edge to jump up a little bit in the priority when we get closer to the draft for this team. Denzel Perriman, I thought definitely needed to come back in terms of having one of your better run-stopping linebackers in that lineup. And now you round that out with hopefully that Junior Colson can come back after a rough redshirt season for him and come into his own, because it should be quick for him to pick up given how familiar he is with Jesse Minter's defense. So if he's healthy, it should benefit him a great deal with that quartet that they now have at the linebacker spot. Bradley Bozeman, I think, again, everyone was just kind of waiting for the contract numbers to really kind of figure out what it was about. And then you kind of figured out
people saw 2 years, 12 million. It's like, whoa.
Yes, yeah.
How much of that's real money? How much
Right.
of that's monopoly money?
Yeah, everybody was kind of just holding their breath for a minute. So, like we started off the show with, you just can't go back with the same interior offensive trio in the interior of the line that you had last year and expect different results. You just can't do it. So, whether this is an indication that the Chargers are looking at Gray Zabel at 22, looking at Jared Wilson beyond that, is this going to mean that Zion Johnson is going to make a permanent move at center and the Chargers are going to shift to guard? There's options on the table, but they have to do something. We still do not know as of right now what's going to happen with Trey Pipkins between now and the draft. We really don't, until something is done for the interior of this offensive line, which, along with tight end, has to be the Chargers' remaining top priority for them to do on the free agent market. You have to go out and get another one of these guys that's still out there. And if I had to bet money and put my finger on anyone that I would feel would be the better fit, just given how you go back and you look at how Baltimore built up their offensive line and some of the skill sets that they look for, they like their offensive linemen to be a little bit more athletic. And to me, that leads to Mekhi Becton. And I think after his transformation that he had in Philadelphia, obviously from his career starting at tackle, kicking into guard, if you were to tell him, hey, you're going to come over here and you're going to play next to Joe Alt, that's good for Mekhi Becton. So that's one that I would definitely look for in terms of the Chargers trying to make a move at. And I think that would be huge as it relates to their offensive line production in general. That's step one. They still have like 5 more steps to complete that formation, but that's step one.
Yeah, I think you have to come away with somebody at guard. Tevin Jenkins, I think earlier today, was visiting the Seahawks at some point. You have Mekhi Becton available. Brandon Scherf is available. Will Hernandez. Like, I just think one, if not 2 bodies at that position are just so monumental for this team going into the draft, because I just don't think you want to be going into draft day like, again, pigeonholed, feeling like those first 2 rounds, like you could probably have to come away with one. And so we'll see what they do there. The Mekhi Becton thing, I think, is particularly interesting for this front office. Chad Alexander, who, was director of player personnel during Mekhi's time with the Jets. What are his feelings on Mekhi Becton now that he has had this resurgence with the Eagles? There, obviously were kind of some not so great reports about Mekhi in New York at the time. So is that something the Chargers front office is sort of open to? Is it, I think that'll be kind of an interesting storyline to watch. But I do think you look at what Becton did on tape this year, you look at what he did throughout the season for the Eagles, and he is kind of the perfect match for this Harbaugh offense. I really think that if the Chargers are kind of willing to bend on, some of the personality stuff, as well as, just some of the stuff from the Jets past, like that is the move that makes sense for them. And PFF projects him for 3 years, $30 million right now, 18 guaranteed. You're getting a player who's still, I think, fairly young. He is going to turn 26 this year and can be, piece of that offensive line going forward. Gives you more flexibility to decide, hey, what do we want to do with Zion Johnson and Bradley Bozeman, who, Joe Ortiz mentioned Zion getting reps at center. It gives you more flexibility with what you want to do with Pipkins. Is he on the team? Is he or not? As you kind of alluded to, that is the offensive line move that makes the most sense on paper for me, at least. And I guess that is the disappointing part of free agency to this point, is just I did not expect the guard market to quite get away from them to the degree that it has.
Yeah, especially when you saw what the Bears did just prior to free agency when they made those 2 trade acquisitions for those offensive line, and everybody was saying, it's like, okay, that kind of takes the bidding away for some of the big guard names that were out there. And then we're now day 5 into free agency officially, sort of, even though it feels like it's been going on for 2 weeks. And you've seen guards go off the market that you expected the Chargers to be in talks for. So in terms of one of their biggest needs heading into free agency, as you said, by the time that we're now on day 5 of free agency, we would have figured that something would have been done to shore that position up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think a certain group of fans would have been excited if there was a wide receiver signed before a guard, but would not have predicted that it would have been Mike Williams before no guard.
Right.
But that is sort of what the free agent market has turned into. So let's wrap up here. What are kind of your projections for the rest of free agency? Obviously, a lot of the fan base has dreams of Cooper Kupp or any receiver. I'm not sure that is quite the direction the Chargers will go, but what are sort of some of your non-negotiables, I guess, for the Chargers of what they need to do in the remainder of free agency as we head into April here?
Yeah, tight end and interior offensive line, there have to be moves done at that spot. Even if you know that it's things eventually that at those respective positions that you're also going to add into the draft, you cannot go into this. You cannot go into this season with those positions not being addressed in some form or fashion. So you definitely have to take those into consideration as the top spots. As it relates to other things that may happen, the Chargers still need to fill out their roster. So I would have to assume that what all of this money is being saved for is going to be for a number of other one-year deals, as well as I'm sure behind the scenes that they were working on the Rashawn Slater extension. So you have to kind of earmark some of that money for that as well. But it's more just from a depth standpoint. Where are the Chargers going to target? Outside of offensive line, outside of tight end, I could still see them going out there and adding a couple other positions on defense. I would still love the idea of JK coming back, but that door has been pretty much shut after the Najee signing. Maybe not necessarily impossible, but less likely given the fact that you have one of the best running back groups in the last 20 years coming up in the draft, and the Chargers probably want a long-term option for Justin Herbert for going forward in the future. So outside of interior offensive line and tight end, they got to come away with something. Outside of that, I'm sure that they're going to fill their other depth positions in some form or fashions on short-term deals.
The Chargers got something.
They did.
Is Del'Shawn Phillips, linebacker from the Houston Texans. So that's a bomb at the end of the show.
I know. Admittedly, that's why I was like pausing, because I was literally, while listening to you, I was looking down at the phone. I'm like trying to read it. I'm like, you know what?
Get done. Did they get an offensive lineman?
Yeah. I'm like, Alex is going to take this. I just need to pay attention to what the hell I'm saying so I don't look like a moron just looking up and down from my phone to the screen. So I'm like, I know Alex has the same notification as I had. I'll let him take the reins there.
Yeah. Adding another body into the mix, makes sense for what we've seen them kind of want to do. They bring Perriman back. So you have now Colson, you have Henley, Perriman.
Is this the Neiman replacement, essentially?
Yeah, very, very possibly. So I was actually just going to go and see. And yeah, he did play a lot of snaps for the Texans special teams last year. 409 snaps, primarily special teams player, although I think he got some defensive action late in the season with Texans having some injuries. But this kind of is, I think, the natural Neiman replacement. So the Chargers and Texans kind of do their own version of a little linebacker switcheroo with Neiman, who went to the Texans earlier in the week. So I do think this is probably that kind of sign. I'm trying to think, am I missing anyone in the linebacker room? I think it's just those 5 now. Oh, and they brought up Troy Dye, who they brought back as well. So yeah, you'll have him kind of doing what he did last year, contributing on defense as well as special teams. So I think they kind of have everyone that they want, because now you're on 5-6 linebackers, and we'll see what they do in the draft, I guess, if there is room for another. But I think they feel pretty comfortable with where they're at. I think the Perriman move earlier this week made a lot of sense, just so you're not entirely banking on Junior Colson, even though I think they still have a lot of faith in him to develop and moving forward. His rookie year obviously affected by the ankle injury, as well as the appendectomy he had to have during training camp and all that. But I think they have a lot of faith, and this particular staff has a lot of faith in him getting up to speed fairly quickly and being able to contribute, certainly at a higher level than he did last year. But But that is going to do it for today. I checked the Twitter notifications one more time just to make sure there wasn't something I missed. Kareem Hunt is back with the Chiefs, but not anything Chargers related for the time being. So we will leave it there. Jake, let the folks know what you got going on Chargers Unleashed and everything you guys are doing.
Hey, we're all in this free agent frenzy together, right? So I know that we're probably going to do a weekly recap as well. That'll drop either later today or early tomorrow. I know that we'll be live tomorrow because when you always get the fans involved in everything, especially this Chargers fan base, the way it is right now, it's always fun bouncing, questions and opinions off of them and seeing what the pulse is on them currently right now. So hopefully by the time that we get to this weekend, things will look a little bit better with the Chargers fan base. But free agent frenzy, week 1 almost in the books, and then Alex, we're soon going to be all roads to the NFL draft. Cannot wait.
Yeah, it's also just funny how the draft changes the closer you get to it. Because I remember I think 2 years ago I had you on before the draft, and we were like, "Ooh, Bijan at 21," and then 2 days before the draft, it was like, "Oh yeah, Bijan's gonna go in the 8."
Yeah, it shifted dramatically in a 48-hour span.
Yeah, which is I feel like very much how the draft goes, where we all have these preconceived notions for 4 months of how it's going to go, and then overnight it's like, yeah, that's not happening. But hopefully we got a lot of draft dreams to dream this year, and hopefully the Chargers have a good one. But free agency first. Thanks for joining us, Jake, and as always, next time, see you guys. Bolt up.